FinTech Friday is part of the FinTech Forum, a new series of events at the Adam Smith Business School that provides opportunities for industry and academia to collaborate and build relationships. Our academic insights events bring together research institutions to discuss cutting-edge developments. Our roundtable events provide a space for academics and industry practitioners to discuss key issues and what's happening in the FinTech ecosystem. And today's event, our FinTech Friday, provides us with industry insights about careers in FinTech, key trends, and some ideas for industry-academia collaboration. Today's event focuses on the role of cloud computing in FinTech. There will be a fireside chat followed by a Q&A session in the end. But please don't wait till the end if you have any questions. If there's anything you'd like to share, comments or questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box and we will pick them up from there. Again, please use the Q&A function for this, not the chat. I would now like to introduce you to our host today, my colleague Charalampos Stasinakis, who will introduce our guest and get the discussion started. Charalampos, over to you.
Thank you, Felix, for the introduction. Welcome everyone for this FinTech Friday series. It is my pleasure to present to you Phil Bezerianos. Hello, Filotheos. Or Phil.
Hi, Babis. How are you?
Very good. How about you?
Very well, very well.
So before we start our question, I'm going to make a short introduction of our speaker today. Filotheos is a senior cloud advisor at CloudReach, which is a leading independent company for multi-cloud services. With Filotheos, we share a common past in National Technical University, so we are alumni and good friends. That's to disclose the reality of the situation here. And except from his undergraduate background in the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering in National Technical University of Athens, Filotheos has studies in electrical and computer engineering in Imperial College. And he has also education from Columbia Business School on digital strategies and Cass Business School on risk management. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you, Babis.
I hope you are well.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Yeah, here in London, it's sunny today, so it's quite nice.
That's good. So, Phil, let's start with personal introduction. Tell us a bit about your current role at CloudReach and what is a typical day for you at work.
So as you mentioned, I am a senior cloud advisor at CloudReach. What does that mean is I work with customers and help them during their cloud journey and their digital transformation. What I mean by that is, it could be providing guidance around public cloud or helping them, for example, overcome some of the challenges through their way. But also, in some cases, you might help them to define a business case or upskilling the teams. It's kind of a very wide role which spans across kind of multiple areas, technical and business areas. Now, well, a typical day, right? I mean, if it exists, right? I think my days includes a lot of calls and a meeting with customers, and that can be workshops or training sessions. And I also spend kind of a good amount of time producing design documents and documentation for the customers, etc. So again, it varies and depends a lot on the project and the customer needs. And if I have some time, I also write some code, but that's getting kind of less and less.
That's good. All habits, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah.
So as our audience knows today, it's going to be a discussion about cloud computing in FinTech. This FinTech jargon becomes a bit confusing for the mainstream audience. So I think a useful start in our discussion would be to make an introduction about the cloud, and perhaps share a bit of information with us about some basic terms about cloud computing. So what would be cloud computing in simple terms?
Yeah, and when if someone sits online, there are going to be many definitions, right? So if we try to consolidate it, it can be that the cloud computing is when you have the on-demand delivery of services, and these are consumed in a pay-as-you-go model. What do we mean now by services? That can be someone can think of like servers or storage or networking, etc. So then, if kind of the next question, how these usually are consumed, this would be over the internet, right? So it's kind of, if you take it traditionally, right, that companies had kind of the traditional data center, very static. When you move to the cloud computing, it is more dynamic because of the pay-as-you-go model. So you consume and you pay based on your needs. And this is, some people might hear it kind of as the elasticity of the cloud computing, which is another term that they might hear.
All right. For those that are following this topic, usually there are some common terms arising, like, for example, public clouds, private cloud, hybrid cloud, or multi-cloud. So could you give us a bit some explanations of what is the differences between these terms?
Sure. So if we keep the definition that we mentioned previously, right, I would say it's kind of this dynamic delivery of service and pay-as-you-go is the cloud computing. If we go to the public clouds, we use the same kind of definition for the cloud part, but then you have the public part, right? And what does that mean is that these cloud services, what we mentioned earlier, like the server, storage, etc., are owned and operated by the third-party cloud service provider. And that can be AWS, Microsoft or Azure, or Google for Google Cloud. And the characteristic is that kind of these resources are owned by the cloud provider, and they're shared across the organizations and the companies that they use that cloud provider. And also the public is that is available to the public. I can go and create an account, kind of a personal account on AWS, exactly the same way that the company can do it, right? So it's not limited in any way to the size of the company or a specific set of companies. Now, if we go to the private cloud, some other terms that people might hear, it would be internet cloud or corporate cloud. For the term cloud, you just keep the same definition, but then you have the private words on front, right? And that means that the resources are exclusively used by one organization. And a typical kind of case of that would be like the physical hardware will be in a data center owned by one company and then consumed by one specific company, right? And in that case, for example, as a person, I cannot go and ask for resources from that. It's just solely consumed by the organization, right? So, and that again, like if we start kind of connecting it like with fintech, right? You can understand why this is an important type of cloud for fintech, because it's this nature of kind of exclusivity and where the data resides and who has access to it, etc.
Right.
The next I mentioned there was kind of hybrid cloud, right? And this is now when you take and combine the two clouds we mentioned earlier, like the public and private. So an example that could be, you might have an organization, let's say in fintech, with strict regulation. They have the data in the private cloud, which what we mentioned earlier is used exclusively by the specific organization. But some of the applications, right, they might be in the public cloud. So you combine them both, and then you can have what we call like a hybrid cloud strategy, that you use both public and private clouds. Now, multi-cloud is kind of when you have more than one public clouds involved in your strategy, right? So you might have AWS and Azure. So you might kind of have some workloads on AWS, some workloads on Azure GCP, and then you say that the company follows a multi-cloud strategy. Another term that is going to start to come up like the last couple of years is polycloud, which is getting kind of confusing now because there are many terms. But the polycloud, what we mean in that context is that the organization is using multiple clouds, AWS or Azure as an example, but they use them for specific functions. So to give you an example, they might have like some serverless functions on AWS, but actually the data, they are in Google Cloud. The reason that some companies might follow a polycloud strategy is that they can have this mix and match based on best offerings for the different providers, and that can, you can achieve kind of reduction on cost or better performance, etc. So again, it's kind of a term that is coming up as the companies mature in the cloud.
No, actually, this is quite interesting because there is a domain. We know usually audience, even like me, that I might have some access or some background with this type of information. We tend to know the general terms, but we don't know the the different hybrids or the reasons behind this. So that's a good insight. And since we're talking about, since I said about the reasons behind using the cloud, I'm wondering, the next logical question is, why is all that happening? So why enterprises actually use the cloud?
Yeah, I think there are many benefits, and why the companies are adopting the cloud, and probably using the term previously, we'll see kind of talk more around the public cloud, which is, as we mentioned earlier, like the ownership of the hardware is to a third party cloud service provider. So one of the benefits for the company is exactly that, is that they don't have to buy and maintain these data centers like the hardware. And for the people who have been in the space, they might know that there's these long upfront costs. The companies had to make an investment, buy the infrastructure, bring it in. They needed to have teams and people to maintain this, etc. So there's a great kind of benefit there. So what that leads us, like as a next step, is that exactly because you don't have these upfront costs, you can innovate and experiment much quicker, right? Because you don't need to make a big investment upfront. So to give an example, you want to try something really quick, put it out to the market to see how people react. You can just pay, kind of what kind of the minimum is, what we mentioned earlier, like the pay-as-you-go nature for 1 month, 2 months. If you see that the idea or the experiment is not really expected, you can decommission that infrastructure. You don't pay for it, right? Like if you think of it, kind of the old world or data centers, you might have to go through finance, buy the infrastructure, provision it, and then if the experiment was not successful or the product didn't go live, you just have to carry that piece of hardware with you. Now, that what has as a result, right, that what we mentioned earlier, around the elasticity and that people can kind of use more resources and services as their needs changing. What that has allowed to do is, business can kind of adapt very quickly to changes in the market. Recent example is the pandemic, right? That we had several companies that they had to change their ways of working and move kind of to a work from home. And the public cloud, in several cases, kind of gave them kind of the ability to scale very quickly, or as an example, scale their website to be able to meet the demand for kind of the additional orders and requests, right? Again, if we think of it, how that would work in an on-prem world, the pandemic would hit you, and then you had to kind of go buy additional servers because you haven't planned for that. And even worse than in the pandemic, try to get a new servers, put them in your data center, you find other challenges, etc. Right? While in public cloud case is kind of up to an abstraction, like you just press a button and you have a new server to deploy your application and kind of serve your customers.
Yes, obviously, yeah. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, I think what we also now have started seeing kind of is like because the cloud providers, we mean like AWS, Azure, and GCP, they're getting more mature, and they offer more sophisticated services. What we mean by that is, like machine learning or AI services or IoT services, etc. So once the organization or the company is in that ecosystem, right, of the public clouds, it's much easier for them to start consuming these services. And for example, if you have your data in Google Cloud, you can benefit. It's really easy to start consuming a service and start applying some machine learning models on your data, right? And the cloud providers have made it that really easy. So if we tied it with the financial services, what we have seen, right, is that the rate that the companies kind of adopt the anti-laundering kind of mechanisms or fraud detection models is kind of like very fast rate, because the cloud providers give you the tools to do that and innovate. And again, just iterate is the sense of I can innovate, I can test it. If it works, I can keep it. If it doesn't work, I have kind of a minimum upfront cost. I can kind of kill it and then start again. And this is the mindset that the companies have started to adopt to benefit.
Yeah, and this is like it is the obvious pathway to innovation through technology, in a sense, for large companies. But recently there's a bit of a shift of scope around the usage of cloud computing in smaller businesses. So do you think that smaller businesses, like small and medium enterprises, would start to benefit more and more as cloud computing becomes more mainstream?
Definitely. And I think what we mentioned, Taylor, right? The fact that you don't need kind of this, you don't have this upfront cost, right? That you need to make like a large investment to start and test your idea, kind of has led to many startups to go out there, right? And if they're successful, they're getting bigger and they're already in the cloud, and they just kind of grow their infrastructure in the cloud. Again, like if we think of like companies, think of like Monzo, like etc. It's like very recent companies, right? How do you compete with some traditional banks? What will be your competitive advantage, right? Without the cloud, it will be very challenging, because in order to have an infrastructure as reliable as like an established bank who has been out there for decades, you need to make some upfront investments. But the cloud kind of gives you the ability to start small, start growing your customer base, and then feed that back to your infrastructure and your solution, and you just improve as you go along, right?
Right.
So I think, yeah, definitely kind of from the small business perspective and startups, the pay-as-you-go model of the cloud has allowed them to, kind of either grow or innovate very quickly and find the right space to be and move on with the right idea.
Is it something that you see at CloudReach too, like having a shift of type of customers that you get?
I think it is a little bit of a mix, right? Because what you're gonna have some big companies that they see the benefit, so they will want to adopt the cloud for the cost savings, etc. What we mentioned earlier, and then you also see some smaller companies that they want to adopt it. So in reality, we see a mix, right? And you have kind of everyone see where they fit in that and what would be the best case. So yeah, we don't see the one or the other. I think is the mixture of both.
Right. Yeah, I understand. Right. It's quite interesting. In terms now of moving a bit into the fintech domain a bit more. So if we wanted to see how cloud and financial services are tied together, what is your view about the current state of public cloud being adopted in financial services?
Yeah, so what we have seen as a trend, like in the market, is like the financial services. While there were some of the last markets to adopt public clouds, they have realized the benefits of the cloud, right? And how by having kind of access to the advanced technologies we mentioned earlier around machine learning and AI, etc., it just kind of give them a competitive advantage, right? So they increase the IT budgets which are committed to the public cloud, and this is what we see across kind of all the type of financial services. Also, if we try to kind of reference what we mentioned previously, like the strategies usually they follow, it would be kind of the multi-cloud strategy. So they will go use more than one cloud providers, or the hybrid cloud, but they're going to keep part of their private cloud for example regulations reasons, and adopt a public cloud. So from strategy perspective, this is the most common approach we see. One thing that I think is a challenge for the banks, and we see it here in the UK, but also elsewhere, is when you shift to the cloud, it's not just to take your current kind of workloads and just move them to the cloud and your journey ends there, right? It's kind of a whole mindset, and what we call like the cloud operating model needs to be applied so that you can benefit from that, right? Is the mindset of what we mentioned earlier, like experimentation and small increments of value, etc. So what we're seeing is that they can, the financial services have seen the benefit, but in some cases they see it as kind of a fragmented opportunity, to, for example, save some money, not like a holistic strategic perspective that we will adopt the cloud. How that translates into reality is that they might move some of the applications very quickly to the cloud, and they miss, for example, some back office applications, right? And then you start having these dependencies that you haven't anticipated. What's worth to mention, right, that the cloud providers, all of the three, AWS, Azure, and GCP, like the big ones, they play a very significant role in helping the financial services to adopting the cloud. The reason big is that it's a highly regulated sector, and you have a lot of requirements to meet. So kind of the cloud providers are constantly working, right, and try to kind of ease some of the concerns the banks may have, for example, around what we mentioned, like the data residency, etc. So they're still growing, and there's still kind of a lot going on into that space.
Yeah, I mean, we during our course in MSc in FinTech, we take a perspective on how financial institutions interact with FinTech in general, and one of the main problem that it's been observed, at least in academic literature, is that they are a bit they have a lot of internal resistances into change. So I guess in your experience, this is something that you see more in customers based on in financial institutions or other customers. So in a sense, I'm wondering, is this internal resistance of change a general problem, or it's more into financial institutions?
I think, when we're talking about the financial institutions, right, there's a reason, right? Because you have, regulatory authorities that they put kind of specific requirements that they need to meet, right? And they cannot bypass these ones. They have to play by the rules. So it's not that I think they don't want to innovate. Is that how you take like the kind of the market you're in and how you can adapt to a new way of working. So, some of the challenge, for example, for the banks, there will be around data, right? So, and when we say data, it's kind of a multifaceted problem, right? Because it's, as an example, you might have restrictions where your data are kept, right? Which country, but also there are some regulations there that they kind of require the companies to own the hardware that the data are kept, right? So it's like another complication there. Then you might have specific requirements around which countries have access to this data, or how this data can be shared in the case of an investigation or data recovery, or where your location of your employees is. So, when you go down that route, there are many things that you need to take when you are operating in a highly regulated sectors. But again, I think, as the demand comes from the financial institutions to adopt the public cloud, kind of the public cloud providers, they try to adopt and make the changes and make it easier for the banks to kind of move their workloads and tick all the boxes that are required for for the specific regulations, etc.
That's great. That's great. And this gives a nice segue to say to our audience that we had a session on RegTech earlier this year. So people that are really interested into that, I would direct them to this link in our FinTech forum. So I think this also gave me a good pass to ask you about the challenges. So obviously there are challenges when it comes for an organization to adopt the cloud. So from your perspective as a practitioner in a cloud company, what do you think would be would you identify as a main challenge for an organization to adopt the cloud?
Yeah, I think, at an organizational level, one of the challenges that we have seen in financial services, again, there is a reason for that, and I will mention it, is that they see it kind of the cloud as an IT only transformation. So I just change my technology in the background, and in cases they fail to change the operating model, what we mentioned, like how they work and how they approach kind of the services to their end customers. And there are many reasons for that. Usually, these institutions, they're quite traditional, quite old. With many people, it's not an easy change to go through. Kind of the cloud enables that and help the kind of the companies to evolve. But once they're in the cloud, what they see is that it impacts the organization in several layers, right? It is not just the technology, but it's kind of the wider organization. For example, when you talk about fintech as an example, how you deal with risk or compliance we mentioned earlier, or how you deal with cybersecurity. So all of these areas, they change the way that you approach and you solve a problem. And this is where we see many companies kind of struggle a little bit to get across. What's worth mentioning here again, kind of for completion, right? That when you move to the cloud, some of the audience may have heard it, is the concept of the shared responsibility model. So there are some areas of the cloud that is the cloud provider responsible. What do you mean by that is the AWS, Azure, etc. While the customer, like let's say the financial institution, is responsible for the security in the cloud, right? What does that mean kind of in detail is, think of it somehow like the cloud provider is responsible for the security, as an example of the low-level components, like the network, but the customer who's consuming that service is responsible for the configuration around accessing these specific components, right? So if we go a little bit deeper, is if you, let's say I have my data onto a cloud service provider, they are responsible to make sure that they are in the region that I set to be, but I will be responsible to set the right region I am in as the customer. And this is a concept, right? While companies adapt and find, where is my responsibility now because it has changed, and how we can approach it kind of to make sure that I comply with regulations, for example.
So just following up on that, I'm wondering, because you have, as a cloud provider or a cloud company, you have a multifaceted job, as you said, in terms of what you are looking for in terms of skill set for employees. Do you go always down the traditional technical skill, computing, programming, or there is a shift towards business strategy, innovation, or growth, value growth, or entrepreneurship as a company yourself?
Yeah, I think like for a company to be successful and having like a successful digital transformation in general, and cloud is part of that, is that kind of the employees need to have what they call it like a T-shaped skill set, right? So how you can think of it is that you might know like many areas, let's say, of the cloud, right? Like some of the services and where it might be used, etc., at a high level. And then on the T-shape, you go in depth in a specific area, right? So if we translate it to specific roles, you might have some people that they traditionally do kind of security, right? And they don't know anything about, let's say, servers or anything, just kind of focus on security. When you move to the cloud, because you're consuming services at this stage, right? And the server you consume is a service from AWS. It's very valuable to know what it is, but then your specialization remains security. You just go deep and in depth on, okay, how do I configure the specific service to be secure? What my security posture should be in the cloud. The same thing if you go to some technical jobs, right? And in development, you need to have kind of a good knowledge of the cloud infrastructure, but actually your focus might be on developing the application. Now, if you go to the business side, it is, we have seen that there's a great value when the business people have kind of a knowledge of the cloud services and the benefits, right? For example, some of the strategies we mentioned, what they mean, why the customers are using it, or how can I use the cloud to innovate, etc. And again, kind of the cloud service providers, they have done a good job to have some kind of courses around that, so that you help the business kind of learn about the cloud and how it can be used, etc. So yeah, it is very valuable to have like high level knowledge, right? It's not necessarily that you can go deep technical, but actually understand and be able to participate in a conversation and understand why it's used. If you want to make an analogy, like everyone knows what a server is, even if you're a business or a technical, it's the same concept, right? You might want to know the services that they offer by the cloud service providers, where they're used, and that might be good for your role, right? And if you're more technical, you might want to go into some levels down and how I configure it, how I provision it, etc. But it's not necessarily for every role.
Yeah, right. It's quite interesting perspective. I mean, I would expect from my background in electrical computer engineering and my shift to academia, that they would have to be like a mixture of something like that, like a technical background in education and a business or entrepreneurship element or project management element in the mix. That's quite interesting. I was wondering, without wanting to ask you something that is proprietary or you don't want to disclose it, would you be able to give us an example of a project that you're working on cloud computing in Cloudreach that could be interesting to give us a fintech perspective?
So it's a wider kind of part of the digital transformation project, right? And I'll try not to mention much for
yes,
the customer what is exactly happening, but actually how you can think of it from the customer perspective. The multiple work streams that they are in flight. Once they change the application of what we mentioned earlier, they move them from the on-prem to the cloud, and is what you might have heard the terms is the lift and shift, which basically you just take it, make some small changes if necessary, and move it. But at the same time, once they do that, because they want to start benefit from the cloud as soon as possible, they see how they can reduce their cost. So there's kind of the element of once you have it, kind of as a next step, start reviewing it, how you can make it more cost efficient. So that you can think of it as one work stream, right?
Right.
Then at the same time, and this is kind of the interesting thing of what we mentioned earlier, that there's so many areas that this is impacted. It is that think of it that when you move these workloads in the cloud, you have the traditional like security teams or network teams, right? That they have policies and standards they operate across the business. And they need to review and update these ones to apply to the cloud. So this is another work on how you make sure that all your policies and standards, they are updated to kind of comply with the requirements, and also at the same time keep the employees informed, right? That this has changed and this is how we approach it. And then when we mentioned the lift and shift, which is just to take some application with the cloud, there are also some other applications that they cannot move to the cloud as is, and they have to go through what we call it like a refactoring, right? Which means that you have to rewrite it in order to be more cloud native, etc. So there might be some work streams, and there are some work streams around that, and that has several implications on not just kind of security, etc., but also on how you develop an application, how you're more agile, how you bring kind of these small increments of value to your end users, etc. So you can see that the digital transformation, the public cloud plays an important role, but there are many areas that they are affected. And as I mentioned earlier, like in my role is not purely technical, because the business on how they will bring a new demand and approach an idea and take it to the market changes, right? So there's some sessions around how can you work more agile, right? So because now you have the ability to work in kind of a smaller deliverables, take your idea with the cloud, you can provision it in a matter of days, put it to the cloud. If it's good, continue. If it's not, kill it, right? This is from technical perspective is straightforward, but actually how you shift your mindset to work like that and capture the ideas and deliver them in that way, that I think is a challenge.
Yeah. So I guess the element of digital transformation, digital strategy is always going to be a part of, in a sense, your job to pitch something to a customer, right?
I think.
And usually, sorry to interrupt, and usually by probably decreasing a bit the technical jargon in this process.
Exactly, and what we need to keep in mind, right, that the technical people, they will, in most of the cases, they will want the latest and shiniest thing out there, right? So they might go and say, yeah, I can just use the cloud and I can use the services. And the cloud, it gives you that that possibility that you can go and you can spin up services and servers and do your test. And it's in the nature of technical people to do that. When you go, kind of to let's say, to the business or like a security officer, etc., right? Their mindset is different, right? And how they do the job and how they're evaluated is completely different. So it's how can you bridge these two worlds exactly so that you can benefit from public cloud, but at the same time do it in a secured way, right? So that you can still comply with the regulations, etc.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure that like none of the big financial institutions want to to have to pay a fine because they allow, let's say, a developer to create a database in a country that they were not supposed to, just because they were allowed to do it. So.
I understand. Yeah. So, given what you said, and given the fact that you have obviously an educational background in electrical computer engineering, but you have also delved into digital strategy and risk management. The last two are quite common topics in a business school. So now I would want to shift a bit the discussion and potentially give us your perspective of how academics like myself and colleagues here in Adams Business School could potentially help making cloud computing more mainstream and connect it with the business school, let's say, education.
Yeah, I think one kind of important thing to keep in mind is, while traditionally the IT is considered kind of to be a blocker of innovation, and that they have kind of separate interest with the business, I think the public cloud has started to change that. And so from future business leader, is important to see the IT as the enabler of the innovation and kind of work together and closer. Don't be afraid, as I mentioned earlier, to learn about IT so that you can communicate with your colleagues that understand what they do. Now, once you do that, then I think to set your mindset right is very important, right? When we're talking about the strategy, when you go to the cloud, we mentioned earlier that these big upfront costs, it's kind of the capex model, right? It's changing to an opex model, right? That everything becomes kind of an operational cost, and that you don't need it, you just stop it, you don't pay for it, right? And that can change the way you approach how, for example, you're going to manage in a different market, or how you're going to manage to kind of introduce a new service to a new country. To give you an example, right? Let's say that you're on a public cloud provider that they have presence in multiple countries. You're based in the UK. You might want to say, I want to see how my service will, like a specific service as an example, will go into Europe. You don't have to make an upfront investment, right? The public cloud provider will have presence in Europe as well. You can speed up some services, have your kind of your criteria of how you're going to review it, let's say after a couple of months, And if it's successful, you continue. If not, you have paid for what you have used for these 2 months, you stop it, you go back. So that one, kind of putting your mindset that, I can test my ideas and I can try new things quickly, is driven also by the business, right? Because they can identify these opportunities, and they can take like a small risk to test their idea. So I think that is kind of again like having like the right mindset of how you're approaching now the delivery to market is very important. And I think kind of what we mentioned earlier, like, is kind of having like an idea of the benefits of the cloud and trying to follow it is very important, because all the cloud providers, they run very quickly, they provide new services, and kind of they solve specific problems for the customers, so it's kind of very fast-paced environment. So try to keep up with that and see where you can kind of benefit and kind of drive forward your business strategies is very important to see how you can use these technologies. At the same time, it's not just for the business people, right, to change their mindset. I think also we see that the technical people now need to understand the business better, so that they can become this enabler that we mentioned, right, and they operate in a new way and in an agile way, and collaborate closer with sales and finance, etc. So it's kind of how these two worlds come together. And yeah, I think it's positive. We see it's kind of companies moving to the right direction. There are challenges in the way, but I'm quite optimistic because the benefits are there, right?
Right. No, I think this could be, given that we are running out of time in a bit. I think this would be also my message. If you want to observe a fintech shifting paradigm, you can just see you and me and how we progressed in our careers. We had the same past in terms of undergraduate studies. You moved to the industry in terms of IT. I moved to the academia in terms of basically finance and business. And now we found ourselves together again talking about this, exactly because this is the way things are transformed through technology. So my last question to you, Phil, would be, let's say, being the devil's advocate here, and in our program in MSc in FinTech, we are also talking about issues around ethics. We're talking about ethics of data management, ethics of security, potentially ethics around sustainability and environmental issues. So is there a particular topic of concern that your customers bring forward in terms of ethics, or that you as a company always have in your mind in terms of the ethical approach of data management? Or
it's like a multi-layered question, right? So because we touched the environment, security, etc. So like from security perspective, or who has access to the data, it's kind of you can secure what we mentioned earlier, right? Like your data, so that you can kind of lock access, and also the cloud providers kind of give a good range of tools that they can help you kind of review your access policy and who has access to the data, when, etc. So from that front, I think again, by trying to comply with specific regulations, the kind of new tools and new kind of capabilities are robotic and provided, but it is something that kind of people need to be aware, right? Kind of you store your data somewhere and you have kind of a contract with someone, right? So it is as any other contract that like a supplier contract that the companies have. If we go from the environmental perspective, right, is kind of there's some studies out there that exactly because of the shared nature of the cloud, from an environmental perspective is kind of more efficient, right? To have one server shared by multiple companies, as just have me one server running in my data center just to use it 5% of it, and then 50 or 60 when during my peak time. So from that perspective, yeah, it kind of moving to the right direction. And again, there's a lot of kind of initiative from the public cloud providers to become kind of carbon neutral and use new ideas on how they can kind of evolve their data centers to consume less power, etc. So there's a lot going on there, exactly because they're so big that they, everyone is looking at them to make the change, right? So yeah, and I think another area when we talk with ethics, it's usually around machine learning AI. Again, it's kind of to mention here that the model is created by the organization, right? It will not be created in most of the case by AWS or Google. They might provide some examples or some templates, but each organization, as seen on-prem, they will have the opportunity to go in, tweak it, feed it with the right data, and use it, right? So again, it's kind of down to the individual as well to make sure that they use these services in an ethical way.
Yeah, definitely. And since you mentioned this part about the environmental element of it, this could be potentially one point of like shared experience between companies that are using cloud computing and then also investors. There's a lot of talk about the green fintech. There's a lot of talk about environmental portfolio positions and all of these that come together into the domain of business strategy. And for sure, cloud computing, because I've seen papers coming recently on this, plays a role in that, in sustainability in a sense. So that's good to hear. I think we are close to the finishing line. I'm gonna check here if we have any Q&As, questions that I've not seen. I don't think we have any at the moment. So I would like to thank you a lot. I found this discussion quite refreshing, especially me being from the same background with you and presenting this in an audience from a business school. That I find it quite refreshing and nice. It was really nice having you. I hope you enjoyed the talk too.
I did, yeah. It was a good talk. A lot to cover. It's a good talk.
I think we might have the opportunity to talk even more, and perhaps in some elements more specific and more technically. Thanks a lot, Phil. I will pass on now to Felix to provide a conclusion for our session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And yeah, I just want to echo that again. Thank you so much, Philotheos, for this interesting discussion and all these fantastic insights on cloud computing. Such an important part of FinTech and of everything that's going on. It's very much appreciated, and it was a pleasure to have you here today. And thank you, Charalampos, for hosting. I think we've heard some really interesting things about the field and how it might develop in the future. Really well done, everyone. And at this point, I also want to thank Claire and Becky from the events team who in the background make sure that these events run smoothly and that we all have the best possible experience. So thank you very much. This was our last FinTech Friday for the current academic session. We will return with more events in September. In the meantime, for more information about this event and other events, you can go to our university website under Connections with Practice and FinTech Forum. I think the link was just posted to the chat as well. Thank you, Claire. Again, thank you all very much for joining us today. Have a great weekend and goodbye. See you soon.